Hi, and welcome to part 5 of our PowerShell Universal for Beginners series. In the last couple videos, we've seen a bunch of different get methods for our routes, which we've used either just a static endpoint, a query string, or a single variable. And now what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at how we can create another route for the get method, but this time using a body. And what you're really going to notice is using a body is pretty common when you're dealing with API or REST API endpoints. A lot of different companies will use bodies as it is a great way for the end user to transmit data, especially for the different methods like put and post or delete. For the get, it is sometimes used as well. It is very easy to do a filtering method with the get with a body instead of just having a query string. They're a little bit easier to write as well. And typically they are a little bit more secure. As we saw with the query string, there are some vulnerabilities related to that as well. And we're going to be able to see how we can actually validate the user input as well. But we're going to actually show you what happens if you don't validate the user input, just to show you guys what that kind of looks like. So let's go ahead and let's create our endpoint here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be naming it with the /users/get_user body at the end. Now the reason why I'm putting body at the end is because I already have the endpoint from one of our previous videos, which we used a query string. Now, if you wanted, you can go ahead and delete that endpoint and just do the get user without the body at the end. And that way your endpoint would be using the body function and not using query strings. But I'm just going to do body just for the sake of this video. And then we're going to do the path is just going to be a dot slash users slash get user body.ps1 just to make sure that we have a separate script file for that. We are going to remove the authentication on the security, and for the execution on the environment, we're going to make sure that we select our PowerShell 7 environment, and we are going to go ahead and we are going to click on OK. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to edit this code. Now, what I always like to do, as you've seen in previous videos, before we actually start writing in a bunch of code, let's go ahead and see if we can actually read in at least what that user is sending to us, because as we know, we're looking for a body and we don't necessarily know what that's actually going to look like. So what I like to do is I like to start with the variable called input data, and I'm going to make that equal to the $body, and we're going to pipe that over to convert from JSON. And what I always like to add is the parameter depth of 100. This way I just make sure that I take everything back from the user. Now, because you are controlling your routes, you don't necessarily need to do that depth 100 if you are only expecting a single layer JSON. You don't really need to, but if you're expecting maybe some nested properties, it is good to specify that depth of 2, 5, 10, whatever you're kind of expecting. If you don't really know what you're expecting, which in this case, I'm just going to rehash whatever the user puts in. I put the depth 100. It's something that I kind of always do, but you can see what is actually fits for your actual endpoint here. And then all we're going to do here is we are going to return the input data, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to save that. And now what I like to do for testing, because I've noticed that sometimes it is a little hard to test using the body here, is I like to go straight into the code here and copy that code. And I like to take that into our Visual Studio Code environment. And let's just go ahead and let's paste that in here. Then all we need to do is add the body parameter here. And inside the body, we are going to do a set of double quotes, and we're going to do a set of curly brackets. Now let's go ahead and let's test it with just one single property in our JSON. So we're going to do a set of single quotes, and we're going to put username in there, and then we're going to do a colon, and then another set of single quotes, and we're going to do test1 here. Let's go ahead and let's run that. And you're going to see that we get back our username test1. Now to add another property, because what's going to happen is a lot of times, especially if you're doing a create or it would be more of a put or a post method, you're going to probably expect someone to put in quite a bit of different properties in here or a bunch of different data in that body. So let's go ahead, let's add a colon here after those set of single quotes, and let's add another set of single quotes, and let's do title. And then after title, we're going to put a colon and another set of single quotes, and let's put CEO here, and let's run this code. And here we can actually see that we get the 2 properties back. So that's perfect. So we're able to read in the data that the user is sending to us. So that is actually perfect. Let's go back to our code here. And let's actually get started on being able to get that user. Now what we can do here is right away we can go ahead and create our variable AD user, and we're going to make that equal to get AD user. We're going to do the identity is going to be the username that we pass in. So I'm going to put in input data dot username because I am going to assume that the user is going to use the property username, and in my documentation I am going to say that they are going to use username. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the server is going to be jacked.local. And we can, of course, add properties here that we are going to pull back. We've been liking to pull back the enabled property. So let's go ahead and let's pull that back. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to create our result variable, which is going to be, of course, a PS custom object as it's been in the past here. And we're going to create that object here with the @ symbol and the set of curly brackets. And let's go ahead and let's just do the name of that user is going to be AD user dot name, the SAM account name, because we don't want to reference that as username. We want to reference that as SAM account name is going to be the AD user dot SAM account name. And let's say enabled is going to equal the AD user dot enabled. All right, and instead of returning the input data, we're going to go ahead and we're going to return the result. Now let's go ahead and let's save this and let's see how well it actually works. So if we actually just go back here, let's remove our title with CEO and let's leave username here, and we're going to leave test1 here as well. So if we actually run this here, we're going to see that we get kind of a little bit of an ugly error message. We get the invoke REST method cannot find an object with identity test1. So the actual error isn't that bad. But what happens if instead of username, we just put user here? We did user test1. We go ahead and we run this. We're going to see that we get an error of cannot validate argument on parameter identity. The argument is null. Now, if someone didn't read your documentation or anything like that, they might read this and they might say, oh, instead of user, it needs to be identity. Now, if they run this again, they're going to get the same error message, which again, just leads to a lot of different confusion, which is why we need to validate to make sure that our user has inputted the parameters that we are expecting. So what I like to do is let's actually go back here. We're going to do this in 2 different steps. So what we're going to do is let's do that user validation of the input. So what I like to do is I like to do a if, and then we're going to do a set of parentheses. Now inside the set of parentheses, we're actually going to have to do one more set of parentheses. And in that nested parentheses, we are going to do the input data, and we're going to pipe that to get dash member. Now what that does is actually gets all the members, or it gets the properties and the methods that belong in that variable. So it's actually going to get us all the different properties that we've passed into the body. And we're going to say dot name because we only want the name of the properties or methods that come back. And we are going to say a dash not contains, and then a set of double quotes username. So if the input data doesn't contain a username, this is what it's going to do. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create our result variable. And actually, all we're going to do is we're just going to copy paste this result variable here. And let's paste that in here and make sure that the formatting is nice and clean. And instead of putting in the name, SAM account name, we're just going to put in message. And we're going to say invalid body parameter. Please be sure to specify the username. All right, so once we actually have that, let's go ahead and let's save that. And what we're going to do here is right after that, we are going to make sure that we are actually returning our result, because we know if it doesn't contain username, we want to create that result and also exit out of that route right away. So we're just going to do that return result instantly. All right, so we're just going to hit save here. And let's go back into our PowerShell Universal. So here we're going to leave it as identity because we want it to fail. We want to see what it looks like. And once we actually run that here, so as you can see, we actually got an error message here, and that is because I did not specify the $ result in the return. You're always going to want to make sure that you validate the typing there. And let's go ahead, let's test that out one last time here. So now we actually get back a nice message in a object, and it gets passed back as JSON. And another important thing of why we want to actually clean that up is because users might be actually using our PowerShell Universal routes with something other than PowerShell. They might be using something like JavaScript, or they might be using Python, C#, or any languages that accept the ability to go and fetch against a API or a REST API, or even invoking something on a URL, kind of like the curl even would have that ability as well. So you're just going to want to make sure that your messages that you are returning back to the user is something that you fully give. Now, let's say we actually correct this and we put in username and we hit run. Now we actually still get that little bit of an ugly error message because it wasn't able to find a user. And as we've seen in the past, what we need to do in this case is always do the error handling as well. So what I like to do is around the getAdUser here, we're going to do a try right before the AdUser, and we're going to do a set of curly brackets, and we're going to do our AdUser and the result directly in there. And then we're going to do a catch and then a set of curly brackets. What I like to do is just copy paste that result here that we had from earlier with the message, but instead of having a manually typed out message, because if it's a try catch, we don't necessarily know what the error message is going to be. It might be that the domain is not available. It might be that the user can't be found. So what I like to do is do the message equals a $__exception.message. And we've seen this in previous routes as well. This just takes the actual message from our error and puts it just nicely in a string. And we are nicely packing that in an object. And then we are still returning that object after the try catch, because we don't actually have to exit out of the try catch right after the try, because it's not going to run the catch unless it catches an error. So we have our return here at the end, and we can actually hit save here. And if we go to our Visual Studio Code and we hit run, now we get a nice error message that we passed back that we cannot find an object with identity test1 under the Jacked local. So now if we actually go ahead and we put in a real user here and hit run, we will actually see that we get back our user. We get the name of our user, the SAM account name, and the enabled property as well, which that is what we would actually expect, and that's what we want to have. And that is really, in a nutshell, how to actually use a body that we can pass in through the body parameter and get results back. It's just going to be simply taking that body variable, converting it from JSON, and then you can dot reference all the different properties. And all you would want to do is just do a validation that the properties that you are expecting later on in your code are actually there. If they aren't there, then send something back to the user in a nice object stating what field they are missing, and just say that it's an invalid body parameter. Now, of course, on top of the message, you can always add a result code or anything like that. This way, they can just look at the result code. If it's a 400 for a good, then they're going to treat it as is. If it doesn't equal 400, then they could do a type of error handling, or maybe you just want the error code to either be a 0 for a success or a 1 for an error. That is completely up to you, and just as long as you document it in your API endpoint documentation, it will be all good to go. So make sure that you stay tuned for that next video, because we're going to be taking a look at slightly different route methods, because all we've looked at so far is just the get method. So we're going to be taking a look at the post and the put methods and delete methods. But also in the next couple videos, we are going to be looking at how we can add the authentication into our routes as well. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that for sure. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Also, be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.